It is so cold outside. Hey everybody, Annie here, sharing your paranormal stories for Paranormal or Ghost Story Wednesdays, whatever we would like to call it. And this first one is actually by someone who would like to remain anonymous. And I think from now on, when I get anonymous submissions, I'm just gonna pick a name. So that way we can refer to this anonymous person by a certain name rather than me trying to say she, he, or they, or them, or it, or whatever. So with this story, I'm going to name this person Stacy, and Stacy is from Germany. With Stacy's particular story, it happened about 27 years ago when she was around the age of 10, and she was in her brother's room, and her brother was actually around the age of 12. The time of the incident was around 6 p.m., and the season was fall, so it was already dark by now. Her brother was laying on his stomach on his bed reading a book, and he happened to be facing the wall, so his room was behind him. Stacy was standing and leaning against the same wall her brother was facing, but looking out the window. So while her brother's reading and she's just dreaming, looking out the window in the darkness, she starts to get this feeling of it was kind of weird, like an electricity running through her body. She then turned around, leaned against the windowsill, and she was then facing like a big green wardrobe that was against the wall, and she sees a shadow of a person. This shadow of a person seemed to be moving rather quickly and kind of odd and not necessarily human-like. This also happened very quickly within a few seconds, and she saw it full on, not in her peripheral. And she also happened to notice a strange haircut in the shadow, so the shape of a very odd shoulder-length cropped haircut. She basically stood there frozen, staring at this wardrobe with this shadow of a person, obviously not being given off by an actual person in the room. She felt as if the shadow itself was the, entity. This next story comes from Jess in Massachusetts. This particular incident happened about 5 years ago when she had been currently dating her now husband, and she had decided to hang out and stay with him at his parents' house. The house was over 300 years old and was pretty run down. However, they were in the middle of renovating and fixing it back up. Her husband did tell her that the house was haunted, and his mother and brother both said the same thing. However, she didn't believe either of them and thought it was just maybe a trick or some sort of something to scare her. Well, this one particular night, she and her husband, boyfriend at the time, they were alone in the entire house. His brother had gone and his parents were gone, and they had the whole house to themselves. They were in his room all the way upstairs, and she had to use the bathroom, but really didn't feel like running downstairs to use the bathroom that they had down there. But she did remember that they had just finished fixing up and restoring the bathroom upstairs, so she decided to use that one. As she walked through the really dark hallway, passing these really dark rooms, she kind of started to get a little freaked out, but that was just basically based on aesthetics and the fact that, she told herself it was just a really old and kind of dark, creepy house. She finally got into the bathroom, and it was actually a really, really nice bathroom. And when you walk in, the toilet is basically on the far left, and the shower is actually kind of blocking the door to the bathroom. And as she's sitting there, she starts to hear footsteps, and more than one set of footsteps, so it sounded like multiple people kind of walking around outside the bathroom door. At first, as she's listening to these noises or footsteps, she's thinking maybe it's the house settling, or because old houses creak, and I know this, I live in an old house, and there's no sneaking around in old houses because everything creaks and moves with every step. She thought maybe it was just the house shifting and doing its old thing. But then she started to hear voices, and it started to sound like multiple people were right outside the bathroom door. As she's listening to these voices, it started to sound like there was a large group of people just kind of hanging out in the hallway outside of the bathroom door. And she's trying to convince herself that it's all in her head, and she's just hearing things and maybe turning natural sounds into voices. She's trying to not feel crazy. But then clear as day, right outside the bathroom door, as if someone's standing right there against the door, she hears a man say, "Shh, you'll scare her." She sat there, frozen in fear. She sat there listening for anything, and it was just dead silent, and she describes it as almost too quiet. She did not want to leave the bathroom. She was terrified that if she walked out, she would come face to face with like a group of people. When she finally got the courage to get out of that bathroom, she booked it to her husband's room, and was getting ready to like yell at him and accuse him of doing this to scare her, but she found him fast asleep. She woke him up to tell him what she had experienced, and he in return told her that he and his middle brother have experienced similar things. This next story comes from Alish, and I hope I said your name right, even though you put how you pronounce it on here. I hope I said it right. The location is in Australia. In 2004, her and her family had moved to this newly built neighborhood in this cluster of hills, which were rumored to have been home to convict settlers. The house was owned by some friends of theirs, and they had planned to rent it to buy, basically. She was the youngest of 4 teens, 3 girls, 1 boy. And she herself received the smallest bedroom in the back of the house on the 2nd floor. Not long after they moved in, they started experiencing odd smells. So they started to smell kind of something like a cigar and rotting meat. They actually basically turned the house upside down, tearing apart furniture, having a pest inspector come and check out the house just to see what might be causing the smell, and obviously they found nothing. And then other little things started to happen as far as things being moved. So books would move, and then objects actually started disappearing completely from inside the house, and they would appear outside, especially outside the front door. Her parents just basically convinced themselves that this was just a house full of teenagers trying to scare each other. So no one was really believing these experiences to be paranormal. Then what would happen was incidents like these, maybe as far as smells and objects moving or disappearing, they would have like 5 to 7 day breaks in between these experiences. Her parents at the time were both working from home, and then they started to hear weird noises, so talking, laughing, coughing, running, doors slamming upstairs in the bedrooms while all of the kids were at school, so the parents were both home alone. And when they would go upstairs to inspect these noises, they would find all of the bedroom doors open, but all the rooms silent. They would then shut all the doors, go downstairs, and not too long after, eventually, it would happen all over again where the doors would open on their own. The doors opening and closing would more likely happen at night while everyone is asleep and in bed, and the doors would just open. But she also made note that these things would happen even though she's trying to blame it on some sort of suction air pressure happening in the house. No outside doors and no windows were open. After 6 months of living in this house, they started to then see things. They would start to see unexplainable lights as well as dark masses, and their dogs at the time wouldn't even leave the downstairs living room area. And she says that you would basically have to pick them up, not easy because they were large dogs, to carry them through the kitchen to the backyard. She also had experienced twice a full body apparition of a man in a suit, although she could never see his face. One of the times that she saw him, she actually got up in the middle of the night to get something to drink, and when she returned to her bedroom, he was there, just standing there. She obviously freaked out, and after that she would actually sleep in her stepsister's room with her because she didn't feel safe in her own room. She said that her parents were the ones who actually witnessed most of the things, especially her mom, who was very sick at the time, and she continued to see various shadow people, and particularly shadow children. Her stepdad actually didn't really believe her mom or, anybody, basically blaming everything on maybe like tricks of light or trick of the eye. He was always, explaining things away because he had actually never seen anything physically. And some people, they have to see it to believe it. And because he hadn't seen anything, he just wasn't believing it. This one particular night at around 10 p.m., he had actually gone out to smoke a cigarette. And he saw what he thought was their neighbor next door, a woman who was also a smoker. And he went to go over and just say, hey, let's smoke a cigarette and chat and stuff like that. He then proceeds to kind of walk towards her to get her attention, to talk and say hey, and he's calling her name and she's not acknowledging, or maybe she doesn't hear him. And as he's getting closer and closer, He then notices that she doesn't have any legs or arms. They're just kind of gone. And as he stops, because he's noticing this, she stops and turns around to face him, and he can't really make out her face, but she's got these big sunken in just blackness for eyes. Basically, his stomach drops and he bolts back towards the house. About 6 months later, they ended up moving out, and they lost everything, you know, with that house. And the people who had actually owned it had never had experiences, but the people who currently live there now are starting to have experiences as well. And she's leaning towards maybe it being something attached to the land, not necessarily because it's a new house, it being the house itself, but something that has to do with the land. What?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm gonna go to the gym.
Okay.
Love you.
I love you too.
Edit time.
I will edit this out.
Oh. But we're so cute together.
I love you.
I love you more.
Mm-mm. This next story comes from Kiki, located in Indiana. On the west side of Indianapolis, there used to be an abandoned insane asylum called Central State, which is now an apartment complex that also has a museum dedicated to the asylum. A group of her friends, as well as her husband and herself, they decided to go exploring, and this was prior to it being apartments. But they decided to go exploring through the buildings. This was also at night, and as they are about halfway through the hallway, they start to smell kind of like a sulfur rotting egg kind of a smell. They got about 3/4 of the way down when they heard something huge just fall out of the corner. So they all ran, you know, to the end of the hallway around the corner, and as they got around the corner, Alright, so they all started to run to the end of the hallway where, you know, they go around the corner of the hallway, and they see like a big metal pillar rolling basically on the floor. The 4 guys that were there actually tried to pick this pillar up, but it was too heavy for all of them to pick up. Now, further down the hallway behind these big double doors, they started hearing things falling. They spent a good 10 to 15 minutes like following these noises, and you know, they wouldn't find anything. But they continued to try and find where these noises were coming from. They ended up in the underground tunnels underneath the asylum. And while they were under there, they started hearing moans and screams and a lot more banging. They started to feel like stomach pains and dizziness, and the sulfur and the rotten egg smell started to get worse. They then heard what sounded like a growl, and that to them was a sign that they needed to leave right now. This next story is from someone who would also like to remain anonymous, so I'm just going to give this person a name, and their name's going to be Debbie. And so Debbie is located in Virginia. When Debbie was around 6 years old, she was staying the night at her cousin's house, and around 1 o'clock in the morning, she was thirsty and complaining about how thirsty she was. She opens the door to go downstairs when a woman in blue walked toward the end of the hallway. She asked her cousin in her room if she knew who this lady in blue was, and her cousin said no. Her cousin also said, "Let's go ask my brother." So they go to her cousin's brother's room, which is obviously her other cousin. So they knocked on the door of her other cousin's room, and when they answered it, they asked, "Do you know this woman in blue?" He was a little frightened, so he pulled both of them inside of his room, and he told them that he didn't know this woman in blue either. Now, as time passed, she was getting a little more annoyed because she was thirsty. She still hadn't gotten her drink of water, so she decided to go downstairs anyways to grab a drink of water, but her cousin was right behind her. Then as they are passing through the hall, out of nowhere, the woman in blue just appears and is standing in front of them, staring. They then turn around, run back to the room. As they get into his bedroom, the woman is there, standing on his bed, screaming, "Get out." They ended up sleeping in her other cousin's room that night. Years later, they found out that the woman was named Sue, and Sue had died tragically in the house by her late husband. He had taken the kids that belonged to both of them, and he had drowned them in the lake about 3 miles away from the house. And the house currently is no longer lived in. This next story comes from Erin, located in Toronto, Canada. And Erin labeled this story as The Laughing. On a Saturday night, Erin was home alone doing laundry at their parents' house. Erin's parents had actually just renovated this little old house, but Erin was actually living in an apartment just a couple blocks away. So this particular afternoon, while they're alone doing laundry, they were just trying to pass the time and minding their own business, doing laundry. You know, what, laundry's not really exciting. What do you do while you're waiting for your laundry to be done, right? Then out of nowhere, they hear this laughing, and it sounded to Erin like their big sister. And Erin thought, awesome, we can hang out while my laundry is being done. Erin thinks that the laughing is coming from upstairs, so Erin proceeds to go upstairs and follow where the laughing is coming from. Erin gets to her room, which is on the 3rd floor of the house, and she's not there. But she's now hearing the laughing coming from the 1st floor now. So Erin is following the laughter, basically, and is calling out to their sister. Erin calls out to her and tells her, stay where you are, like, don't move. As Erin reaches the kitchen, they hear her in the basement laughing. Erin gets to the basement, and they start to walk down the stairs, and as they do this, the laughing stops. They're now standing on the landing, looking down into the dark basement, and they realize that they're making a huge mistake. Then Erin kind of snaps out of it and just yells out, you stay away from me. And then they run, and they said, I mean run, to the front door of the house and to call their mom and tell her what's up. Erin feels that there was something trying to get them into the basement for whatever reason. Well, that's all for today. If you would like to submit your personal paranormal ghost story, please go down to the description below this video, and that's where you can learn how to submit your story. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Stay tuned for next week, and I love you guys, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. Ooh, my foot is asleep. It's not the greatest feeling in the world. I hate it when my foot's asleep. Well, that's what I get for sitting on the floor, huh? Yeah.